So BC, how frantically, be honest, were you typing after the first 60 seconds Coach Rhule takes the podium and approaches the mic?
Yeah, it was interesting because he comes up and he says, "Yeah, Dylan, we'll see tomorrow with Dylan, how he's looking and all that." Normally there you go. There's your headline. That's 5 questions, starting quarterback, a little haze around what his status is, all that. And then he of course he drops the bomb. And, Dana, since you know that news, he'll be calling the plays. It was kind of an interesting intro to it. But you saw everyone quickly seeing how fast they could, how many words per minute they could pound out. It's a good thing I took Mavis Beacom typing class growing up with my home row, so I was prepared.
BC, quick ask Zoe, right? You got to make sure you get that right. That's a deep cut. If anybody remembers taking typing classes,
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if people know the Mavis Beacom reference at all, but there used to be a program on your computer where you could type, and you were driving in a car, and bugs would splatter on your windshield if you missed the proper keys. So that's how I learned how to type. Thanks to that, I was prepared for what we're talking about today.
Are you talking about Mavis Beacom, the co-founder of MySpace?
Is that, I don't know. Is that a thing?
Well, the only reason I know is because she's black.
What?
Mavis Beacon.
Oh, Beacon! I thought you said Beacom. I'm always chomping at the bit to champion my people.
I did say Beacom.
You big MySpace guy?
I thought it was Beacom. It's Beacon. Mavis Beacon typing class.
Okay, was that the same one that had all the words associated with the letters in the row so you could remember where they were?
Shane, we're getting kicked off.
I think so, yeah. I just remember the bugs on the windshield, and you had to avoid them.
I think I could do the whole keyboard if I still I'm not going to because that's not good radio, but I'm pretty sure I could still go through the whole thing.
Yeah, not good radio, right? We all of a sudden should switch that up. BC, so you're so you're
my bad.
You're frantically typing.
Rack 'em.
And again, true serum. How long did it take you to recalibrate to dial in after the news? Because I'm sure there's this processing, there's this typing, and you're like, wait, what did he just say?
Yeah, was there a delay where
where you started to process the rest of what he was saying?
Not a huge delay because I knew going in there could be something.
Gotcha.
I knew we might be aiming toward that. So I was a little bit prepared. Slight warning by Keith Mann without giving it away. He walked in the room. He said, the schedule's going to be a little different this week with coaches or whatever. So there was a 30 to 60 second head start there if you kind of took that cue that something different was going to be in place, maybe with staff. But
was that your first indicator, or had you heard something before that?
No. I hadn't heard that it was official, but I knew it was definitely a possibility with a guy with the Dana Holgorsen's track record in town. I'll go back to what I said on this very show a week ago, though. We were talking about the loyalty that I think there is in the coaching profession when certain guys own certain spaces, or this is your title at this moment in this operation, and I think there's respect of those boundaries. I was applying it at that point, of course, to Holgorsen being respectful, which I think he would be, of Satterfield if he had been OC, and I think you're going to see the reverse of that, where I think Sat, as you saw, was humble about it, handled it as professionally as could be, and it's still part of the operation, and you fall in line with, okay, this is my job, and I have to do it as well as possible. So that's one of the things I admire about that business is how people, for the most part, just get to work with this is the way we're going to steer this ship, and everybody sort of grabs what they need to do that. So hopefully that's what's going on over there.
Hey, so BC, let me ask you something, and maybe this is just and I'm just looking for a different perspective here to validate my thoughts. Weird. It kind of gives me the vibe that I think Coach Rhule stayed with us as long as he could with Coach Satterfield, understanding I think he wanted to give him every opportunity to have success after how he helped piece that thing together last year. You think that's right? Like, okay, you got some young wide receivers. Okay, you got a quarterback. We got a veteran offensive line. Now let's see what you can do. Like, he wanted to exhaust every option before he cut the cord, and Coach Satterfield knows that he gave him every option. So it might not be as, quote-unquote, awkward as we think.
I agree completely with that. I think he gave him ample time. I would think Satterfield probably agrees. These guys all know how this business operates, and that, you know, as it was said on Monday, even at one point, it is a results-oriented business. You're only averaging 18.3 points per Big Ten game. At some point, that's probably not going to square up. You know, the best interview, and I'm not saying this because I'm on your show, it was the best interview that Rhule gave about Satterfield's situation last year was on your guys' show. When he was talking. Yeah, and you guys know the part. It was when he was talking about, he had a good analogy or whatever about, like, you know, being a doctor almost like on a subway, having to, you know, fix someone up with you don't have all the tools. And that was last year for Satterfield. So I think a lot of fans, well, they were like, okay, you're going to have to prove it to me, buddy. There was definitely that theme. There was also, I think, an understanding that it was very difficult for him last year. And there was a little bit, I would say there was an open mind with some in the fan base that this could be different this year under Sat. And I feel like the ample amount of time was given. And I would actually say, you know, Rhule probably course-corrected at the right time, but I would also say that he course-corrected probably a little quicker than some previous Husker leaders have done in certain situations, and I think Nebraska fans appreciate the whatever it takes follow-through that we heard in the last week's press conference. We saw it on display this week.
Yeah, BC, because I'm glad you brought that up, because it would have been a really reasonable thing to do to maybe switch play calling from Satterfield to Glenn Thomas or somebody that's already on your staff and already in the room and say, hey, we'll figure the staffing out in the off season. This is this is pretty weird, right? Like, I don't know that I've seen a play caller get hired mid-season before. I'm sure it's happened, but I can't think of one off the top of my head. Like, this is pretty strange, right?
Yeah, it is unique territory. I couldn't come up with one either off the cuff. You know, I did ask, and I don't know that, you know, I wouldn't expect necessarily Rhule to answer this, but I asked, like, maybe how in tune Dana had been from a distance with this team, you know, like maybe in preparation for this. You're sort of, you know, behind the scenes, you're watching film a little bit on the personnel and thinking this is what I would do if I got there. So I don't know how much of that went on and if that helped him or was going to help him jump right in. But it definitely is different. But the way Matt Rhule laid it out on Monday, it makes sense in this day and age. You give a guy a little runway now to sort of examine the personnel, see what works with this group of guys, what doesn't. And it's not going to be all perfect. It's not suddenly just going to hum along. But this is also useful for Holgorsen if he's the guy next year, that he's getting this very important time with these players as opposed to that first chance to see guys up close being in spring ball next year. So I think that's huge, that part of it. So it is weird, but it's also advantageous if you do it right.
BC, do you view this more as a tryout for Holgorsen at Nebraska or for Nebraska for Holgorsen, or am I looking at it totally wrong?
I couldn't say. I think Rhule wants Holgorsen to be his guy next year. I think he kind of said that with, you know, in some of his press conference that, you know, he doesn't know what things will hold in 3 weeks, but he thinks it could be a great fit. And Matt Rhule doesn't strike me as the type of guy who would just like, you know, say that this isn't what's going to happen because it's not great necessarily the next 3 weeks. I think he knows the challenges Dana has doing this on the fly right now. So I don't think there's going to be like a judgment of if it works. He works here over what the results are necessarily the next 3 weeks. I'm sure, from Dana's perspective, you never know. He could have other opportunities that pop up. He's a no name in football circles. So there's always that possibility something else could cross his radar. But I don't know. It just feels like really good odds these two are going to be together next year. And you'd love to see them get a little momentum before that happens.
So, BC, you're kind of watching this thing play out, and how do you draw the line? And this is coming from one of the more even-keeled people I know in your sphere of, I'm willing to do what I need to do to give our kids in this university the best chance to have success, but I'm not going to cave either, even though it may look like, shoot, I'm kind of you know what I mean? Optics could go a bunch of different ways, but like I like to say, optics are a word we use when we don't have enough information. How do you parse through just the competitive nature of giving us a chance to win versus, oh man, is he panicking?
Yeah, I don't think people see it as panicking. I think it goes back to one of the earlier questions. I think most people, from what I'm hearing, it's like, yeah, it was time. I mean, there was so much commotion after every game about, and fair or not, the coordinator takes the brunt of the criticism, it seems like, and everything would always come back to Satterfield. Like after every post game, it was a discussion about him. And that had to be difficult on him as a coach and as a person too. And so I just think, honestly, it's probably good for this program to relieve that conversation from the table. Like that. Now, not everything is just about one guy. Like the Collins show, I don't hear all of them, but I can imagine half the phone calls are about one coach. And that's not necessarily the way you want it to be. So you kind of, I think, by doing this now, you make sure the topic is back on the whole operation, and it does fall on, as he has said, Matt Rhule has said, guys have to do their own part too. You have to make plays. You can't catch a pass and just fall down. You can't miss on a block on a bubble screen that should be at least 5 or 6 yards, and it's no yards. So all that stuff he's talked about now. Let's put all our attention on that and not just on one guy anymore. So I don't think people are going to see it as panic. I think people thought it was the right time. I think you asked a good question earlier in stating that, I think even Marcus Satterfield knows that he was kind of up against the clock on having to produce, and this is the moment usually switches like this happen. So it makes a lot of sense, and I don't think it's probably going to affect them within the walls too much with that.
Yeah, I try to keep my feelings out of it, but since we're just liking on all these authentic moments, so there was two things that I was really trying to be protective of, and I think ultimately at the end of the day for me, BC, it was I want Nebraska to flourish, and I thought, okay, for Coach Sat, even you're 5-1. Don't explain things to us in the media. We don't need it. Just stay the course. Give yourself the best chance to just hunker down, kind of like he had to do last year, right? But it got to 5-1, and it was like we were picking apart 5-1, even though we didn't. It's like we hadn't been really. You guys are complaining about this, so you heard that in my voice. But the other thing is. And I hate to use this in sports, BC. I feel like a total gump when I do it, but I wanted to say it's unfair, right? I know I sound like a crybaby, and they're grown men and they're paid, but I thought it was unfair, and I always tried to separate. It's like Sat took all the blame and the losses, and the new shiny toy got all the accolades when they won, and so I would always ask, hey, how do we separate the two? Are they connected? Is it? And so you could kind of see this coming. That's why I think the relationship that Coach Rhule and Coach Sat have will be of the utmost importance because the players will see two things. They'll see a guy that they know their head coach absolutely respects and loves, and he gave him every opportunity, but he still made a tough decision. Right. Sat may end up being, BC, the best example of caring but not coddling.
Right. No, I mean it's a strong message because, like you say, it's known how much respect there is. These guys go back to Western Carolina in 2005. Satterfield's been at every stop along the way with him. And I want to be clear on this. I've seen coaches come and go here, and I've seen coaches who have been criticized as not knowing a lick about football and all this nonsense, and they'll go somewhere else and they'll do pretty fine, And so sometimes
Tim Beck.
Quite, yeah, it doesn't quite work out in a certain road you're on sometimes, and you switch to a different lane and things take off for a guy. So I think Satterfield's a good football coach. It just wasn't the level they needed it to be. I think everybody kind of understood that over there. And, he made a hard decision, and I think people appreciate that. As I said, I think he course corrected as quick as he possibly could have in this situation while also being fair about it. So I think there's a lot to be said. Now, the key, I think about being a coordinator in this program, what a fishbowl it is. I'm looking at the quote Rhule had on Monday. He said, I think as we've moved throughout the year, we've just tried to get too many things, to get too many guys involved. We've had too many adjustments. I'll put that squarely on me as a head coach. As well as I do, Damon, around here, there's always this suggestion, well, you got to get Harburg more touches.
Yep.
You got to get this guy more touches. And it's hard to not try to, I think, appease that sometimes and let that enter into your way of thinking as a play caller. And you got to be kind of hard-headed and almost just like have a wall up to all of that.
That's what drew me to him last year. He stayed the course. And the minute he started saying, well, we can score in the fourth quarter if we have to, or we get in a shootout, and he started kind of explaining through us about what they could do when they wanted to win games. I was like, oh, poop. Like, he's hearing, they're listening. They're like, and whether I agreed with it or not, I just wanted conviction because I've seen it work. I've seen single wing work. I've seen air raid work. Like, I don't care what it is.
If you execute it well,
if you execute it, it's gonna work.
Everything
works. So whatever it is, just do it. I didn't even care really. You know what I mean? I just was like, oh, poo. This may not go well. We're starting to waver a little bit, right?
Yeah, you have to, like, for instance, I might go to a press conference and I'm working on something on. Let's just use an example like Thomas Fidone. So you write something or you ask a question about like Thomas Fidone's activity or like if trying to get him the ball more or something that's along those lines. And you could go to a weekly press conference and you could hear maybe 3 or 4 different examples of, well, Ja'Cory Barney maybe needs more touches or Fidone or Harburg. And so I do think you have to have a strong will in that spot. And this is where I think it is useful that Holgorsen's just done this so long. He sat in a captain's chair at 2 different schools. It's probably useful in that respect of maybe you don't get drawn into that as much where you can answer the question like, yeah, I would love to get him the ball more, but it doesn't necessarily affect your game planning or anything like that, or where you're trying to hit a quota box or whatever for a certain player. So I do think that's a challenge here, though, because there is always like ideas just in the air about how to involve everybody. So you got to be strong, as you say, in your convictions on things.
BC, last thing for me here before we let you go. One of the other quotes that Coach Rhule had on Monday was talking about getting the most competitive guys on the field and letting them loose. When he says something like that, are there certain players that pop to your mind?
Oh, that's a good question, Ravi. I think, I I think we've seen the examples of some of them have flourished. Like, I think Jacory's a kid who's built like that. There's probably some guys behind the scenes, and it's not easy for like guys who haven't played at this point to just pop in and suddenly be big time contributors. You don't see that a lot either. But I'm sure there's some young guys that they have in mind that over the last part, especially if they can get to a bowl game, which is why it's so huge, you'd love to get them more involved in that particular game as well, who are really showing out that we're not seeing yet. So I don't know who the names are. I mean, I know there's young guys who are making the trip. I know Caleb's making the trip. I know Donovan Jones has been on road trips.
Wait, how do you know Caleb's making the trip?
Well, I not the USC. I meant ISU. But
well, he is, but I'm just saying it's pretty good, B.
He has previously made a trip.
I meant previously. I wasn't trying to act like I knew something. But,
breaking news from BC.
But Damon just confirmed it. I got
it. Fudge.
I'm going to go type that out now. Good thing I have fast typing skills. I'll get that out there.
Thanks, Mavis Beacon. I mean, Brian Christopherson.
Oh, man. You always have a gym, BC. Appreciate it.